So, you can still come across my video at this hour. I thought I was already forgotten. Today, let's skip guessing left foot or right foot. As usual, if you see this, make some noise in the chat, or leave a comment on the right. Let me know I'm still alive out here. Alright, that's enough small talk. Let's jump straight into today's story. Hiking alone through the silent forest left him exhausted. He chose a spot near a hillside. The terrain here was flat, safe from snow accumulation during winter, and sheltered from strong winds. Using the iron shovel that had accompanied him for 2.5 years, he drew the outline of a one-room shelter on the ground. He divided the pit into sections for a bed, and left a space for the chimney. The soil in midwinter had already hardened slightly. As he pressed the shovel down with force, the layer below was dug even deeper. Just then, a heavy snowstorm suddenly arrived. The shelter's foundation pit formed a distinct square hole in the white landscape. He knew how important this pit was. Every shovel of soil was measured precisely to size. He dug a foundation deep enough to ensure the structure would stay stable and withstand the harsh winter winds. At that moment, it was as if he was sculpting a work of art. After finishing the foundation, he began collecting fallen wood nearby. In the snow-covered forest, dry leaves and branches lay scattered everywhere. He embedded a log into the ground, then leaned more wood against it as support. This made the campfire more stable. Using his axe, he shaved thin strips of wood for oxygen flow. Then, with his fire starter, he struck it to ignite the wood. The logs caught fire, lighting up the white landscape around him and raising the temperature. At last, he felt a trace of warmth in the snow. The river had frozen solid from the extreme cold, but he knew he could use melted snow instead. He filled his kettle with clean, white snow, brought it back to camp, and placed it on the fire to melt into water. This became his main water source in the forest, ensuring his basic survival needs were met. Next came building the cabin's frame. This job required a large amount of wood. He pulled out his saw and found a fallen, snow-covered tree. He began cutting from the center of the trunk. The tree fell heavily to the ground, breaking the silence of early winter. He trimmed each log, removing branches and bumps, leaving only smooth trunks behind. He cut each piece to the right length. These logs would form the main structure of his snow cabin. Logging was time-consuming and exhausting. The freezing air kept him fully alert. He carried the logs one by one back to camp. Eventually, he gathered enough wood. But by then, darkness had already fallen. The next morning, the wood was buried under snow. He fixed the thick logs in the corners and used smaller sticks to compact the soil around them. Then came the second beam. These logs would serve as the cabin's main support beams, ensuring it could bear weight. In the following hours, he repeated the same process, securing each log, until all were embedded firmly into the ground. To ensure good ventilation inside the cabin and effectively direct smoke outside, he decided to build a simple chimney. He started digging a hole at the spot he reserved for it, making sure it connected from top to bottom. After carving a round recess at the base, the chimney tunnel was complete. He poured boiling water into the soil blocks, then stirred them with his shovel to soften the mixture. Next, he carried over several large stones from the west side. He planned to use a mix of clay and stones for the chimney to save materials and increase strength. He built it entirely by hand. This kind of chimney required great patience and skill. Each stone had to be placed as symmetrically as possible to ensure stability and to make it look more refined. As the chimney's frame gradually took shape, the finished result, from afar, looked like a pine cone. This was an essential survival task for living in a winter cabin in the winter forest. There was a chimney, so the wooden cabin would no longer be troubled by smoke, providing him with a sense of security and a fully protective shelter. He stripped the bark off all the stored logs, leaving only the smooth trunks, and polished the protruding parts. Then cut grooves on both sides of the wood, and used the grooves to make a simple mortise and tenon structure. In the following time, he naturally did the same again and again. The connection succeeded. 3 logs completed the roof frame. Next was to perfect the roof. To ensure the smoke outlet would not be blocked, he split the wood at the chimney opening in half. Finally, he assembled the other side of the roof in the same way, together, and embedded wild nails into the wooden joints. As the cabin's overall frame gradually improved, a sudden heavy snowfall covered the entire forest. The blizzard mixed with cold air blanketed the whole forest, but his speed did not slow down at all. Snowflakes covered the roof of the cabin and the ground around it. At this moment, he was perfecting the cabin's surrounding walls, embedding nails into the wood to complete the joints. The ongoing blizzard witnessed the growth of his shelter. In the construction of the snowy cabin, he did not neglect the details. To ensure ventilation inside the cabin and good lighting, he specifically reserved a place for a small window. This not only made the interior brighter, but also improved air circulation to prevent the roof from being soaked again by heavy snow. He kept adjusting the waterproofing of the roof to ensure the cabin could withstand the impact of the blizzard. He tightly fixed a waterproof cloth on the roof, then secured a ring of wood on the outer side, and finally covered the roof with black soil. To ensure rainwater wouldn't seep through the roof, he filled the eaves with soil, effectively preventing it from freezing into icicles. After the roof was fully covered with soil, he began building a small wooden path in front of the cabin, making entry and exit more convenient. The charm of wilderness building lies in crafting by hand, and so was the wooden door. He made the door frame with fir logs, then kept joining wooden planks in the center. The small solid wood door, weighing nearly 20 kilograms, was installed in the reserved door frame, while the window was filled with windproof and insulated plastic sheeting, and finally nailed to the wall to finish. The gaps between the wall and doors or windows were naturally filled with soil. Although it was a very slow task, he still achieved a zero-cost, high-quality seal. Once everything was ready, he lit a campfire outside the cabin and skewered some prepared sausages for smoking and roasting. He gazed at the newly built cabin, his eyes filled with satisfaction and comfort. Inside, the soil blocks he left served as a bed frame. Now he just needed to cover them with wood and add a comfortable mattress. At that moment, he found peace and belonging in his heart. That day, the old wanderer who loved roaming the world set out again on his snowy journey. The heavy snowfall filled the whole of December. He carried his backpack and walked alone through the white wilderness, following his one camp, one move principle. He once again searched for shelter, and this blizzard made his experience complete. He decided to wait out the snowstorm, collecting firewood in the meantime, and using birch logs to build the shelter for dryness. At that time, he cut the thinner logs into equal lengths, then gradually stacked and stored them for later use. He fixed 2 logs in a cross shape and used a wild steel wire to wrap the joints tightly. He then wove some vines through the cross structure to form a circular frame hub. As he was about to face another snowstorm, he had to speed up the construction of the shelter's framework until the round shelter frame took shape, and another blizzard struck again, right as it began to stand out and revealed its form amidst the snowstorm. As another heavy blizzard descended, Freljord, in the forest covered in silver and white, every plant was covered with frost. Thus, he perfected the cylinder under the heavy snow. He used thinner tree trunks as outer supports for the cylinder, fixing the trunks one by one and cutting them in turn to ensure the edges of the cylinder were neat. Finally, he tightened it with wild steel wire. Old Pai had already passed through the blizzard season upon returning to his homeland. But since blizzards in this area could come at any time, he had to complete the shelter as soon as possible. He quickly took out a 2.5 centimeter thick hemp rope and wrapped it around the outside of the cylinder frame. Finally, using the lever principle, he could lift it into the air. At this moment, the hanging cylindrical hammock took shape. Old Pai then loosened the soil with an iron shovel and poured in the nearby water, adding some dry grass. After mixing evenly, it could be used as casting material for the frame to ensure the cylinder was waterproof. He also added some cement powder in advance. Making use of all the free resources of nature is the true rule of wilderness survival. Not only that, Old Pie also deliberately left space inside the cylinder for a small fireplace. After all, when winter comes, only living inside can keep warm. The chimney let out cooking smoke that gently drifted into the air with warmth. A new snow began to fall slowly. He hid inside the cylinder, watching the beautiful winter scenery. To improve the ceiling of the shelter, he chopped some thin wood and joined them together to serve as the entrance door of the cylinder. This way, it could prevent wild animals from entering the forest shelter. Next, he joined together a thick layer of plastic film and fixed it on the window openings. Finally, he covered it with a layer of mixed cement soil to make it windproof and rainproof. In the forest, endless moss was the best material. With its new outer layer, the cylindrical shelter looked brand new. In the depths of the deserted forest, he prepared a wild meal. The aroma of the pork rib soup made his mouth water. After working hard for so long, he finally relaxed at this moment. After a hearty meal, he lit an oil lamp using the fishing flame. Full and satisfied, he could crawl into his cozy hanging hut and rest well. Since the northern part of the forest was humid and had large temperature differences, Old Pie's third shelter needed to be warmer. To avoid the rainy season, Old Pie planned to build another wooden house. He set his sights on a sloped area that could block the wind and began digging the foundation pit. Thanks to the high humidity of the forest, the soil at the beginning of winter was not too hard. As the sun gradually lit up the forest, through Old Pie's unrelenting effort with the shovel, the pit was gradually dug out. However, when the initial work of the pit was completed, he began to study how to build a warm fireplace. Now that the cold winter was about to arrive, he had to think about how at night he wouldn't freeze into an ice block. So he opened the top and bottom of the fireplace to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. At this time, the fireplace was already complete, but he had to consider how to perfectly vent the smoke. And this corroded tree could be used as a chimney. Old Pie used an iron axe to open a groove in the wood seam, intending to increase the inner space a bit more. When the ant colony was sleeping, their skylight was open. They all decided to lower Old Pie's credit score. As the iron axe smashed the inside of the wood, a hollow wooden chimney was made. Old Pie wrapped and fixed the chimney with a wild rope. As he stuffed the stove with firewood and lit it, a burst of smoke filled the shelter with warmth and light. To make the shelter relatively stronger, Old Pie used a handsaw to cut more even wooden pieces, improving the appearance of the shelter's frame. He placed the wood into the corner foundation pit and restored the circular shape. He could now build the wooden frame of the shelter. When the first snow of winter fell, everything in the forest was covered with frost. Old Pie carried a bundle of wood, walking across the rustling snowfield. This wilderness shelter construction also made him feel spiritually uplifted. He wrapped a bundle of wild yarn around the joints of the frame. Thanks to the advantage of being a semi-underground shelter, the earthen walls had strong wind resistance, so he only needed to stack logs along the frame. Until the sun's heat melted the snow, Old Pie finally returned to the site, filling the gaps of the shelter with wood. At this time, the shelter had already begun to take shape. To create a hidden ultimate shelter, he collected countless dry leaves from the back mountain, planning to spread them over the ceiling for better sealing. He used the soil dug from the pit and spread it completely over the ceiling as waste reuse. To enhance the ceiling effect, he placed moist turf around the eaves to prevent ice infiltration caused by winter's low temperatures. At this time, Old Pie stepped into a moss-covered area to make the surroundings of the shelter less dull and harsh. He collected about 0.01 tons of moss and spread it all over the top of the shelter. It must be said, the new outer layer of the shelter truly looked brand new. The same method applied to building the earthen walls. He first cut the logs to similar lengths, then repeated the process, using wooden ropes to tie them around the frame. a light rain fell from the sky, urging Old Pie to speed up the construction. This side of the earthen wall, however, was different. Old Pie deliberately left a square opening in the center, so that later he could build a small window to admire the natural scenery. It must be said that moss has a wide range of uses. Filling the gaps in the earthen walls with it prevented cold wind from blowing inside. Considering how inconvenient entering and exiting was, he dug out a small path before the door. Though the shrine-like shelter was compact, it gave a great sense of security. After covering the front door with moss, he considered the next day's weather forecast, which predicted a coming blizzard. So he urgently needed a wooden door to block the cold wind. Thanks to Old Pie's superb weaving skills, he managed to use ropes to make a wooden door and fit it perfectly into the door frame. After a simple test of the door's function, he realized his tired body was already hungry and cold. So he took out the kettle he had carried for years and placed it on the fire. Wild fruits on the branches could bring a hint of sweetness to the clear stream water. When the water in the kettle boiled, he added the fruits. In the damp and cold wilderness forest, a cup of warm tea could replenish his body's heat and restore his strength. Life alone in the wild was just that simple. Laying a layer of insulation and sleeping anytime, resting while listening to the sound of firewood in the stove, was truly relaxing. When he woke up the next morning, the forest was covered in a blanket of white. Fruits on the branches were coated with frost. The sound of the wind and snow outside woke Old Pie. He opened the wooden door and took a breath of cold, fresh air. Looking at the snowy forest, he sighed with emotion. Life alone in the wilderness was truly worth it. However, the sudden drop in temperature forced him to move. To quickly restore body heat, he roamed through the forest and began collecting scattered wood on the ground, preparing for daily life. Lighting the fire, he finally felt a trace of warmth. Old Pie skewered a wild chicken on a stick and rotated it by hand over the roaring flames. Eating roasted chicken in a snowy world. What kind of feeling was that? I can only say it's like a spring breeze brushing over Lugu Lake, an autumn rain soaking Jujaigu Valley. Old Pie could finally bring his lunch back to the shelter and enjoy it heartily.